The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Mud caked the boots of every northern soldier, and yet their morale was high. The word had spread across the camp. Robb Stark had captured Sir Jaime Lannister. The Kingslayer, the pride of the Lannister name, lay bound and bruised under Stark guard. It was a victory no one had expected, and it lit a fire inside the hearts of men who had left their cold homes to fight for the North. Robb stood outside his tent, staring into the gloomy woods, his direwolf grey wind at his side. The air smelled of wet leather, smoke and iron. Catelyn Stark entered quietly, her cloak soaked, eyes sharp with worry. "You've won a great battle," she said, her voice calm but burdened. "But now comes the harder part. What will you do next?" Robb didn't answer right away. He was young, barely past boyhood, but his eyes had aged fast in these few months of war.
"They call me king in the north," he said finally. "But if I stop now—"
"If I settle just for the Riverlands and the North, the Lannisters will regroup. They'll come back stronger. Tywin won't stop. Cersei won't stop. They'll burn everything we've built. You want to march to King's Landing?" Catelyn guessed. He nodded slowly. She looked at him long and hard. "You're thinking like your father," she said. "But you must act unlike him. This is not about honor anymore. This is survival." Robb clenched his jaw. "Cersei killed my father. Her son sits on the Iron Throne, calling himself king. And now I have her brother in chains. I can break them. All of them." Catelyn was silent for a moment. "If you go south, you risk everything. The men are tired. Winter is coming, and Tywin Lannister is no fool." Robb turned to her fully. "I can't just sit and wait for them to come north. What happens then? They take Riverrun. They take the Neck. They come for Winterfell. I have to strike now. I have to cut the head off the snake before it coils around us again." That night, Robb met with his bannermen, the Great John, Rose Bolton, Lord Karstark, and the Blackfish among them. Around a map of Westeros lit by lantern light, Robb laid out his bold idea. They would march south fast and hard, while the capital was still weak and unaware. Jaime would be taken with them, paraded as a symbol of Lannister defeat. The people of the Crownlands, angry with the cruelty of King Joffrey, might even open their gates. Roose Bolton, cold and calculating, raised a brow. "And when Tywin hears of it, he'll come down on us like a hammer. Then we make sure there's no anvil left to strike against," Robb replied. "We take King's Landing before he can move." The Great John laughed. "Bold boy, damn bold. I like it." Others were cautious, but Robb's passion and purpose cut through the doubts. The plan was set. They would move within a week. Swift scouts were sent ahead. The men began preparing for a march south that no one had expected. At the Red Keep, meanwhile, Cersei Lannister sat on the edge of her bed, fingers trembling around a goblet of wine. News had reached her by Raven. Sir Jaime had been captured. Her face was cold, but inside she was spiraling. Without Jaime, without Tywin nearby, and with Joffrey's unpredictability, her grip on the court was slipping. Lords whispered in corridors. The gold cloaks were restless. Varys smiled too much. Littlefinger had grown quiet. She knew war was coming, but she thought she'd have more time. "Bring in Pycelle," she said to the guards. When the old Maester entered, she snapped, "How many men can we muster if the North marches on us now?" Pycelle blinked slowly. "Your Grace, such a move would be unthinkable." "King's Landing is—" "Answer the question," she snapped. He stammered. "A few thousand in the city guard, but poorly trained. And, well, Zoloras Tyrell and his knights are yet in Highgarden." Cersei's lips twisted. "So we are weak." The silence confirmed it. In the darkness of her chambers, she realized something she hadn't before. If Robb Stark didn't wait, if he came now, she wouldn't be able to stop him. Not without her father, not without Jaime. Far to the north, Robb Stark stood beneath the darkening sky, watching as his army assembled again. The banners of House Stark, Karstark, Umber, and Tully flapped in the wind. This time he would not wait. He would march. And if he had his way, Cersei Lannister's reign would end before it ever truly began. The march south was unlike anything Robb Stark had done before. This wasn't just vengeance, it was strategy. It was a race against time, Every step his army took brought them closer to the walls of King's Landing, and closer to the kind of war his father would have avoided. But Robb wasn't Eddard Stark, not anymore. They moved fast. Through muddy hills, burned-out farms, and frightened villages, the northern host pushed forward. They didn't sack or pillage, Robb had made that clear. But the people saw the direwolf banners and the chains on Jaime Lannister's wrists and knew this wasn't a raid. This was a storm coming for the Iron Throne. News spread like wildfire. The Stark boy was bringing war to the capital. In King's Landing, panic began to seep through every corner of the court. Cersei tried to appear calm, a queen in control, but her mask was cracking. With Jaime gone, and Tywin still tied down in the west, she had few true allies left. Littlefinger promised coin, Varys whispered riddles, and Joffrey. Well, Joffrey wanted to mount Robb's head on a spike without even knowing how to stop him. The Northmen will break his army against our gates, Joffrey shouted in the throne room, his voice echoing off stone walls. Let him come. I'll feed his direwolf to the dogs. Cersei said nothing. Her silence was not strength, it was fear disguised. Behind closed doors, she had sent ravens to her father, begging him to send troops. But Tywin's armies were days away, and the capital had only the gold cloaks and a few thousand city guards. The Tyrells hadn't committed their strength yet, and Stannis was still licking his wounds from the stepstones. For the first time, Cersei was alone, and Robb knew it. When the Stark army reached the Blackwater Rush, just a day's ride from the city, they halted briefly. Robb gathered his top commanders in the old ruins of a watchtower. King's Landing is weaker than it looks, he told them. Cersei has no armies left. The people hate the boy king, and we have something she never expected. Jaime. He turned to Lord Karstark, who'd been sour since his sons died fighting the Lannisters. I need you to ride around with a small unit. Cause chaos near the King's Road. Make them think Tywin's coming. Keep the city afraid. To Rose Bolton, Robb said, you'll take a force up the eastern banks. Come in by night. No fires, no noise. Wait for my signal. The rest would move at dawn. Grey wind had already been seen near the outer villages, terrifying locals who'd only heard stories of the Stark boy with the wolf. Inside the city, chaos reigned. Food was low. The gates were barely guarded. Refugees had been pouring in for weeks, and fear had turned them wild. Riots had broken out in Flea Bottom. Cersei had ordered executions to keep control, but it only made things worse. The gold cloaks were paid to be loyal, not to die for a mad queen and her worst son. When Robb's army appeared on the horizon, the bells of King's Landing didn't ring in warning. They rang in surrender, not officially, not by command, but in the hearts of the people. They'd had enough. The next morning, Robb approached the gates under a white flag. Jaime Lannister rode beside him, chained to his horse, gagged. A hush fell over the city walls. From the battlements, Cersei watched them with cold, furious eyes. She wore the halls of the Red Keep felt colder than the north. Robb Stark stood before the Iron Throne, a chair built by dragon fire, soaked in centuries of blood, and now silent under the shadow of a boy from Winterfell. He didn't sit. He didn't even approach it. It wasn't his goal. He hadn't marched on King's Landing to become king of the Seven Kingdoms. He had come to tear down the Lannisters, end the war, and make the world remember that the North would not be broken again. Yet the throne stood there, daring him. Burn it, Greatjon muttered beside him. Take a hammer to it, or Grey Wind could piss on it. Robb smirked but didn't reply. In truth, part of him wanted to destroy it, to end the idea that one chair ruled all men. But he knew what would happen next. The South would never accept northern independence without fear or respect. If he wanted peace, real peace, he needed more than a sword. He needed leverage. Joffrey Baratheon, if anyone still called him that, was locked in the dungeons of the Red Keep. He had screamed, spat, and cursed as they dragged him down. But now he was quiet, nearly catatonic. Without his crown, he was just a pale, broken boy. Robb visited him once. You killed my father, Robb said, standing behind the bars. Joffrey didn't respond. He stared at the wall, lips twitching. The silence felt heavier than any insult. You thought the crown made you untouchable. But you forgot something. A wolf never forgets who drew first blood. Robb turned and walked away, leaving the former king in chains, alone with his terror. Cersei had vanished into the chaos, but Robb wasn't naive. She was out there, and she would not stay hidden for long. Varys had whispered that she'd been seen heading west with a small group of loyal guards, and gold. Always gold. "She'll crawl back to Tywin," Rose Bolton warned. "And when she does, he'll come," Robb nodded. "Then we send her a message before she reaches him." A raven flew from King's Landing the next morning. It carried two things: a sealed letter to Lord Tywin Lannister and a red ribbon tied to the leg. The ribbon was stained with Joffrey's blood. The realm trembled. With the capital taken and the Lannister heir in chains, Robb Stark became something no one had expected, a northern king with the fate of Westeros in his hands. Lords across the Riverlands and the Stormlands bent the knee in exchange for peace. Many hated the Lannisters more than they feared Robb. Even Stannis Baratheon, holed up on Dragonstone, sent a raven. "The bastard king is dead. The throne remains mine by law. If you seek justice, meet me at Storm's End. If you seek peace, do not block my path." Robb considered the letter long and hard. He didn't reply. Instead, he summoned Maester Luwin, the Blackfish, and his mother. "I won't fight a war for a throne I don't want," Robb said, "but I won't hand it to another who rules with fire and fury. We need something different, something no one's ever tried in the South." Catelyn looked up. "What do you mean?" "We hold the capital. We have Joffrey. The people are with us. For the first time in 100 years, the throne is empty. Let's leave it that way." They stared at him, confused. "I won't be king of the Seven Kingdoms. Let them rule themselves. Let the Reach crown who they want. Let Dorne be free. Let the Stormlands follow Stannis if they must. But the North is done bending the knee." There was silence in the room. "You want to break the wheel," said the Blackfish finally. "Not rule it," Robb nodded. A council was formed, not of lords and ladies, but of representatives, maesters, commanders, and common folk, brought in from the city and the nearby regions. Robb knew this wouldn't last. The old families would hate it. The South would resist. But he wasn't building something for them. He was building it for those who had no voice before. The Iron Throne remained untouched, a cold symbol of what had been. Robb sent one more raven, this one to the north, to Winterfell. "To Bran," he said softly as he tied the message. He missed his brothers more than he could say. The war had taken so much from him. But if he could end it now, it wouldn't take everything. In the Riverlands, Tywin Lannister read the letter. His hands didn't shake, but his eyes darkened. When he reached the part about Joffrey, he paused. He closed it slowly, folded it once, and tossed it into the fire. "My daughter," he muttered. He stood, eyes full of quiet rage. Summon the army. But even Tywin knew this war had already changed. The boy wolf had done what no one expected. He had taken the lion's crown and refused to wear it. The fire in the Red Keep's hearth crackled softly as Robb Stark stood with his back to it, arms crossed, eyes scanning a map that sprawled across the long wooden table. The candlelight danced over the lines of rivers and roads, but his mind was somewhere else, somewhere colder, harsher, and familiar. He missed Winterfell. He missed his brothers. But there was no time for longing now. The Lannisters were not finished. Roose Bolton leaned over the map, gloved fingers resting near the Westerlands. "Lord Tywin's army will march within weeks. He'll bring every bannerman he has left. He's not the kind of man to forgive the fall of his house or the death of his grandson. He'll expect us to hold the capital," Robb replied calmly. "That's what any conqueror would do." Rose looked up. "We're not holding it." Robb's eyes met his. Not for long. The room went quiet. Greatjon stood from his seat, surprised. "You'd abandon the city?" "After all we've bled for." "I didn't come here to rule this place," Robb said firmly. "I came to cut the snake's head off. Cersei is gone. Joffrey is dead. Jaime is in chains. And now I give Tywin a choice. He can chase a crown that no longer matters, or he can bury his last son." In the dungeons beneath the Red Keep, Jaime Lannister sat chained in silence. His golden hair was dirty, tangled, his face bruised but still proud. Robb entered with only 2 guards. You've lost, Robb said, not unkindly. But you're not dead. Jaime tilted his head. That's a dangerous mistake. No, Robb replied. It's a message. He tossed something down in front of the cell, a letter sealed with stark wax. Deliver that to your father when we release you. Tell him this city is not a prize. It's a curse. If he comes for it, he'll find it empty, and his legacy rotting in chains. Jaime's mouth curled into a smirk. You're not killing me then? No, Robb said. You're going home. But if I ever see you again on a battlefield, your head rolls first. As Robb turned to leave, Jaime called out, Stark! Robb paused. Do you even know what you are now? You're not a king. You're not a conqueror. So what are you? Robb didn't look back. Free. True to his word, Robb gathered his forces and began preparing to leave King's Landing. Many couldn't believe it. The capital had fallen with barely a fight, and now the boy who took it was walking away. But Robb wasn't leaving it in chaos. The council he'd formed began to take shape. Gendry Waters, the bastard of King Robert, found in a smithy and brought to court by Varys, was declared protector of the realm by unanimous vote. Not king, not lord, but a common-born leader chosen by council, backed by the people, guided by advisors from all over Westeros. It was a gamble, but Robb didn't need it to last forever, just long enough to break the old system. The Iron Throne remained untouched, covered with a grey cloth. I want it melted down, Robb told the Blackfish as they rode out. Turn it into swords for the wall, or nails for rebuilding homes. Anything but a throne. North of King's Landing, Tywin Lannister's army moved like a red tide. Tens of thousands of armored men, silent and determined, marching beneath lion banners. When Jaime reached their camp, escorted by Stark guards and released with no ransom, Tywin didn't rush to embrace him. You let them take the capital, he said, staring at his son like a stranger. You let them kill your nephew. And you brought me a letter? Jaime dropped the scroll onto the table. Tywin read it in silence, then without a word crumpled it in his fist. Pull back, he said to his captains. We marched to Casterly Rock. One of them blinked. We're not taking the capital back? There is no capital, Tywin snapped. The wind that greeted them as they passed into the north was different, colder, purer. It carried the scent of pine and snow and old roots, not blood and ash like the south. Robb Stark sat high on his horse, his direwolf trotting beside him, and for the first time in what felt like years, he allowed himself to breathe like a man who had survived. The war was behind him, or so he hoped. The northern bannermen rode in quiet formation. Their armor was worn, but their heads were high. They had done what no army had done in generations. Marched to the gates of King's Landing, broken the Lannister regime, and walked away with their honor intact. But even with the weight of victory on their shoulders, the North was not the same place Robb had left behind. Winterfell had been burned. It was Maester Luwin who broke the news days before they arrived. By the time Theon Greyjoy took it, he'd said softly, most had fled. Those who didn't suffered. Robb had clenched his fists until his knuckles cracked. Theon? He was our ward. He was like a brother. Sometimes, Luwin replied. The worst betrayal comes from those closest to your heart. Robb hadn't spoken much after that. When they finally reached Winterfell, what stood before them was not the proud castle of House Stark. It was a husk, blackened walls, collapsed towers, and silence where there once were howling wolves and roaring hearths. No banners flew, no guards stood at the gates. Winterfell, once the heart of the North, had become a ghost. Robb dismounted and stepped into the snow-covered courtyard. Grey Wind sniffed the air and let out a low growl, as if sensing the sorrow buried deep in the stones. Catelyn stood beside her son, her face unreadable. He burned his own home, she whispered. Robb shook his head. It was never his. He wore our words, ate our bread, and smiled in our halls. But he was never one of us. They buried the bodies that remained, some servants, some guards, all nameless now. Maester Luwin found the remains of the library, some torn books, and a shattered Stark statue in the crypts. That night, Robb knelt in the godswood, the snow falling quietly around him. He prayed not for vengeance, but for strength. strength to rebuild, strength to lead, strength to forgive if ever the day came. In the following weeks, word spread across the north that Robb Stark had returned. Not just as a commander, not just as the boy who had marched south and won, but as the king who chose peace over power. From Bear Island to White Harbor, houses swore their loyalty again. Lords came bearing gifts, farmers brought food, and blacksmiths offered their trade. But Robb didn't want celebration. He wanted unity. At the council he formed in the broken great hall of Winterfell, he spoke plainly. We will not live like the South. No more games, no more thrones built from bones. We are not dogs to be leashed. The North is free and will stay that way. But we must rebuild together. Every house, high or low, has a voice. It wasn't just words. He named Glover men to oversee roads, a Mormont girl to train with the guard, and even small folk representatives, farmers, fishermen, tradesmen, to join the council. Some lords grumbled, but most saw what he was doing. He wasn't just rebuilding Winterfell. He was reshaping the North. But not all voices in the dark were silent. Deep in the west, Tywin Lannister sat in Casterly Rock, hands folded, eyes cold as stone. His house had lost everything: crown, capital, reputation. Cersei remained in hiding, and with Jaime's return came only shame. He hadn't forgotten. He never would. And while he sent no raven, no army, and no words northward, Tywin began spinning new plans that involved coin instead of steel. Meanwhile, in the far east, across the narrow sea, a young woman with silver hair stood before a small but growing army of her own. Her name was Daenerys, and she had dragons. The game Robb Stark had walked away from was only changing shape. But for now the North knew peace, and in the Godswood of Winterfell, under the heart tree's red leaves, Robb Stark swore a vow not to be King of Ashes, but to be the first of his name to bring lasting honor to it. The halls of Winterfell echoed differently now. They were quieter, less proud, but more alive in a strange way. Fires were lit again, stone was being repaired, and laughter, soft, hesitant laughter, returned to its corridors. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something, a beginning. Robb Stark spent his mornings with the builders, his afternoons with the council, and his nights in the Godswood. He barely slept, not because of fear, but because he knew how short peace could last. And the whispers had started again, not from the north, but from the south. A raven arrived from the Vale, bearing the sigil of House Arryn. Lysa's letter was laced with flattery and false concern, asking if Robb would accept the Vale's protection and perhaps arrange a marriage alliance. Robb didn't reply. Another came from the Riverlands, a message from Edmure Tully, his uncle, who had begun rebuilding Riverrun and calming the chaos in the Central Kingdoms. He asked if Robb might return briefly to discuss uniting the Riverlands and the North more permanently. Robb replied simply, "Let each land find its own peace, and let no man claim both crowns." But the letter that made his blood run cold didn't come from a lord at all. It came from beyond the wall. The parchment was rough, the ink faded and uneven. It had been written by a black brother of the Night's Watch, carried south by ravens, desperate to be heard. The dead walk. Wildlings flee not from hunger, but from shadows. Something stirs in the far north. The wall holds for now, but it grows colder each night. It was signed by Jeor Mormont. Robb's hands tightened around the scroll. No one in the south had believed the old stories. Even Robb had dismissed them as tales meant to frighten children. But now, with the war behind him and the south fractured, he felt the wind differently. It blew sharper. It howled at night like something unseen was whispering through the trees. He called a meeting in the rebuilt Great Hall that evening. "I fought to break the chains of southern greed," he said, standing before lords and common folk alike. "I fought to end the war, but we are not done. A darker threat grows beyond the wall, and I won't wait for it to find us." "Is this not madness?" asked Lord Serwyn. "We've just come home." "We're still patching roofs. And while we patch roofs," Robb said calmly, "the world freezes above us. I won't send others to die for the North while we sit safe. I'll go myself." That stunned them. Catelyn, sitting quietly to his left, finally spoke. "You've bled enough. Let others go this time." Robb looked at her. If I don't lead, who will follow? Within days, ravens were sent to every house. Volunteers were called. Supplies were gathered. Blacksmiths began reforging blades with dragonglass found from old caches traded from the east. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The North began to prepare not for war, but for survival. And for the first time in generations, the North sent men not south for glory, but north into the unknown. At Castle Black, the arrival of the Stark banners brought more hope than 1,000 swords. The Watch was barely holding its numbers. They had heard no word from most of their ranging parties. Wildlings had massed at the edges of the forest, but refused to attack. They simply stared, watching the wall as if something worse lay behind it. Robb met with Jorah Mormont in the Lord Commander's tower. The old man looked tired, more worn than when Robb had last seen him as a boy. "You came," Jorah said, almost surprised. "I didn't think you would. No one else has." "I didn't come for glory," Robb said. "I came because I believe you." Jorah leaned forward. "Then you're one of the few who'll survive what's coming." That night, Robb stood atop the wall, staring out into the black forest below. The wind screamed past him colder than any southern night. Snowflakes swirled around his cloak, and grey wind, now twice the size of a man, growled low beside him. "What are you watching for?" asked Jon Snow, who had joined him silently. Robb smiled faintly. "The same thing you are." Jon stared out with him. "Sometimes I think I see shapes in the trees, but maybe it's just the cold." "No," Robb whispered. "It's something else. I can feel it." A silence passed between them, and then Jon said, "They'll never sing songs about this." The wall creaked under the weight of frost and time. For weeks now, Robb Stark and his men had patrolled the icy stretch between Eastwatch and Castle Black, working alongside the Night's Watch, mending collapsed stairs, digging out buried watchposts, and reinforcing gates that had not been tested in 100 years. But it wasn't the cold that bothered Robb. It was the silence. Too silent. Too still. At first, scouts had spotted wildlings near the tree line, watching but never approaching. That was weeks ago. Now even they had vanished, as if the forest had swallowed them whole. Robb stood at the top of the wall again, his breath fogging in front of him, grey wind pressed close by his side. Jon Snow approached, hood pulled low against the wind. "Nothing again?" Jon asked. "Not even a bird," Robb murmured. "Just empty woods." Jon squinted into the white blur of snow and pine. "That's what frightens me. Wildlings don't go quiet unless something worse is behind them." Robb didn't respond, but he'd felt it too. It wasn't fear exactly. It was weight, pressing down on the world like the breath before a storm. The wall wasn't just a defense. It was a warning. Back in Winterfell, the North was stirring again. Lords were receiving messages from the wall that something unnatural lingered beyond. Refugees, old wildlings, broken brothers, scattered northern folk had begun to drift south with stories of white walkers, shadows that moved through snow, and bodies that didn't stay dead. Many dismissed it. Some mocked it. But Lady Maege Mormont, tough as boiled leather, did not. "If the king in the north believes the threat is real," she told her bannermen, "then the North stands behind him." One by one, ravens flew north to Castle Black, and the wall braced for war. The first real sign of death came under a moonless sky. A ranger patrol led by Sir Wylis of House Tallheart never returned. At first, it was assumed they'd been lost in the storm. But 2 days later their horses returned, riderless, blood-flecked and terrified. One of them had an arrow lodged in its flank, an arrow made of ice. Robb held it in his hands that night, turning it slowly over in the candlelight. It was as cold as winter itself. Even the flames nearby didn't warm it. "They've begun," Jon said, his voice tight. Robb looked up at him. "Then we have to move first." They formed a strike force, a mix of Night's Watch brothers and northern soldiers, led by Robb, Jon, and Tormund Giantsbane, who had bent the knee in exchange for protection for his people. "I don't like kings," Tormund had said, "but I trust a man who rides with his wolf." They left at dawn with 40 men, heading north into the haunted forest. The snow grew deeper with each mile, the trees closer, darker. It felt like they were being swallowed whole. Grey Wind growled constantly, his ears pinned back, never straying far from Robb's side. After the second night, they found the first body. It was one of the missing rangers, propped upright against a tree, eyes frozen open, skin pale as bone. No wounds, no blood. Robb reached for the body. "Don't," Jon said suddenly, too late. The corpse let out a shriek, a sound not meant for mortal ears, and grabbed Robb's wrist with inhuman strength. Grey Wind lunged, ripping the creature's throat out in a shower of black blood and ice shards. It fell twitching to the snow, clawing at the air. Tormund swore under his breath. "That's no man." "No," Jon said. "That's what comes before the others." The next night they found the camp. Dozens of them, White Walkers and Whites, circling a dead wildling village like wolves. They moved like smoke, soundless and deliberate, their blue eyes glowing in the dark. Robb stared at them from the tree line, heart hammering in his chest. This wasn't war. This was something older, colder, wrong. "We need to hit them," Jon whispered. "Before they see us," Robb nodded once. "We burn everything." And so they did. Torches were lit, arrows rained, fire screamed through the night. Some of the creatures fell and never rose again, but others, the ones with blue eyes and swords of ice, stepped through the flames untouched. One of them locked eyes with Robb across the burning village. He felt the cold even from that distance. It raised its hand slowly, and every dead body in the snow began to move. They barely escaped. Half the strike force died that night. Tormund took a wound to the leg. Jon nearly lost a hand, but Robb came back changed. Not broken, but changed. He now understood what was coming, and it had no care for crowns, banners, or ancient grudges. Only death. Back at Castle Black, Robb gathered every commander. "No more waiting," he said, his voice hard as ice. "We gather every house, every sword, every torch. We send ravens to every kingdom, even the ones that hate us." Jon looked at him. "Do you think they'll listen?" Robb didn't blink. "They will if they want to live." The raven flew through wind and storm, wings cutting across the frozen air like a knife. It carried a message not of politics or marriage alliances, but survival. A call to arms written in Robb Stark's own hand, sealed with direwolf wax. "The long night comes," not a story, not a legend. I've seen it with my own eyes. The dead walk. The White Walkers lead them. If Westeros remains divided, it will fall. Send men, send dragonglass, send fire, or there will be no kingdoms left to rule. The letter flew east to Dragonstone, south to Old Town, west to Casterly Rock, and across the sea to a queen with dragons. At Castle Black, the war preparations continued day and night. For once, the North did not complain about the cold. They embraced it, because they knew the enemy felt nothing at all. Every sword was reforged. Every scrap of obsidian was shaped into arrowheads and blades. Ravens flew every morning. Scouts returned with fewer smiles each time. The dead were getting bolder. They no longer hid in the forest. Now they hunted. Jon Snow stood with Robb atop the wall, watching torches flicker in the camps below. "They're still not responding," Jon muttered. "The Vale, the Reach, not even the Stormlands." Robb nodded slowly. "Because they don't believe it's real. To them, I'm just the wolf who stole the south and ran back home. And what will you do when they never come?" Robb looked to the north, endless white and the threat crawling through it. "Then the north will stand alone." Jon didn't smile. "It won't stand for long." But not all had turned a deaf ear. 3 days later, a ship arrived at Eastwatch by the sea. Silver banners flew from its masts. The crew wore no house sigils, only black and red armor trimmed in gold. And on the dock, a cloaked figure descended, followed by 2 dragons in the sky. Daenerys Targaryen had come. Robb met her in the war room, unsure what to expect. She was not the mad queen he'd feared. She was poised, fierce, and spoke with a quiet fire in her words, not unlike himself. "I've heard of you, king in the north," she said. "You took the throne and walked away from it." "That's rare." Robb bowed slightly. "I'm not a king anymore." She raised an eyebrow. "Then who leads the north?" Robb answered without hesitation. "The living." That earned him a small nod of respect. "I did not cross the sea to fight your war," she said. "But if what you've written is true, then it is my war too." Together they stood before a map marking enemy movements, dead paths, and places still untouched. The dragons circled overhead. Hope had arrived, in fire. That night, the first real snow of the long night began to fall. Thick, heavy, endless, like a curtain drawn across the world. The wall trembled. Ravens stopped returning. The last group of scouts never came back. Even Grey Wind became restless, howling without cause, pacing the halls like he sensed something none of them could. Then came the horn. 3 blasts. The dead were here. They hit the wall with the force of 1,000 winters. Ice shattered under their footsteps. Wights clawed up the sides like spiders, shrieking. White Walkers strode behind them, cold and confident. At their center, towering and still, stood the Night King. Robb led the charge himself, sword of dragonglass in hand, grey wind tearing through corpses beside him. Jon fought with Ghost at his side, striking through undead with fire in his eyes. Daenerys soared overhead on Drogon, raining fire that made the night glow orange for miles. The battle was madness, a storm of screams, steel, and snow. But they held. For hours they held, until the wall cracked. A massive, thunderous break in the ice, not from magic, not from fire, but from something older. The Night King raised his arm. It was walking away from it and choosing a war that mattered, the war for the living, the only one that ever really counted.